This episode of Mr. Hutchings History is now streaming on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and all your favorite platforms like Castbox, Podcast Addict, and Amazon Music. Tune in now.
Welcome to Mr. Hutchings History, where the past comes alive. Let's dive into today's story.
Hey everyone, welcome back. Ready for another deep dive?
Always.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, today we're going back in time a bit. 1937.
Ooh, okay.
Yeah. Setting the scene, right? It's a world that, well, it feels a bit like a powder keg, you know?
Oh, yeah, I see.
Like
yeah.
everything's kind of tense. Japan's over there invading China. Mussolini's making moves in Ethiopia. And Hitler, well, we all know what he was up to.
Yeah, dark times.
Right. But here in the U.S., most folks just want to stay at it, keep their heads down.
Makes sense.
Totally. But that's where President Roosevelt comes in. He gives this speech that's all about, I don't know, kind of subtly shifting how Americans were thinking about all this chaos overseas.
Subtly.
Yeah, it's called the Quarantine Speech. It's really a fascinating piece of rhetoric. I mean, it's almost like a masterclass in persuasion.
It really is. And it's amazing how he starts,
Oh, tell me about it.
he's dedicating this brand new bridge in Chicago, the Outer Drive Bridge. He's talking all about progress, American ingenuity, like everything's great. But then it's like he does a magic trick, right? He just pivots. Suddenly he's talking about this reign of terror happening overseas.
Yeah, like whiplash almost.
Totally. That shift, from celebration to super serious concern, it just grabs you. You can't help but listen.
He pulls you in. It's like he's lulling you into this sense of, everything's fine, and then bam,
Yeah.
reality check.
Exactly. And then he hits you with this metaphor. It's powerful. The epidemic of world lawlessness.
Ooh, yeah, remember that?
He doesn't just talk about violence, right? He frames it as this contagious disease.
Oh, yeah, that's sneaky smart.
It is. Think about it, right? Back then, isolationism was like, no, the American way. Big time.
Stay out of it.
Right. But by saying aggression is like a disease, something that could spread, he's kind of chipping away at that we're safe idea,
Right.
that the U.S. is somehow immune.
Chipping away. That's
Yeah.
a good way to put it. Because you're right, isolationism was so deeply ingrained.
Deeply. And he's playing with that fear of being infected. Brilliant, really.
Totally. He's taking it beyond just like tanks and bombs. Now it's this insidious thing that could just creep in when you least expect it.
Exactly. And he doesn't stop there.
He keeps going.
Oh, yeah. It's like he's going for the heartstrings now, appealing to something deeper, shared values.
Right.
He talks about culture being destroyed, treaties being violated, the whole foundation of civilization being wiped away.
Yeah, he lays it on thick.
Mm.
But effectively, I think.
Super effective. He's reminding Americans that this stuff isn't just happening over there,
It's not some abstract concept.
Exactly. It's an attack on, the core principles America's built on.
So he's making it personal, like drawing a direct line from these far-off events to American lives.
Absolutely. He smashes that illusion of safety, straight up warns that if the world goes down the drain, America may expect no mercy.
Wow. Yeah, it's not pulling any punches.
Nope. The threat is right there at the doorstep now. But then, get this, he offers a solution. And the way he frames it is just genius.
Lay it on me.
He talks about quarantine.
Oh, right. Quarantine. That's brilliant.
Right. It doesn't scream war, which would have, sent everyone running for the hills.
Oh, yeah. America was clinging to isolationism like a life raft.
Absolutely. But quarantine, it sounds more measured,
Like we're just being cautious.
Right. It's about containment, like isolating the bad guys and keeping that disease of lawlessness from spreading.
Yeah, a much easier pill to swallow than let's go to war.
Way easier. But at the same time, he's hinting at something else. This need for, countries working together, collective action.
He's planting a seed, suggesting that maybe, just maybe, America can't just sit back and watch the world go up in flames.
And that's where things get even more intriguing. On the one hand, he's giving a practical solution, but on another level, he's kind of testing the waters, seeing how far he can push this whole idea of America being a responsible player on the world stage.
He's playing the long game. I get it.
He knows he can't just change everyone's minds overnight, so he's nudging them in a new direction.
Clever. So he's issuing this moral wake-up call, but he's doing it carefully.
Very carefully. He's walking a tightrope, right? Got to make a statement, but not rock the boat too much.
So we've got fear, we've got morality, we've got self-interest, and this, gentle push for a more active role for America, all in one speech.
all in one speech. It's amazing how he weaves it all together.
It really is. It makes you wonder what was really going on in his head, or like, what were his true motivations?
And that, my friend, is where historians start to disagree. Was he really all about this internationalism thing? Or was he just playing politics, trying to position the U.S. as the big boss on the world stage? It's like peeling an onion, lots of layers.
That's a perfect analogy. And that's what makes his speech so darn fascinating. It's not just what he said, it's how he said it. The whole context, the layers of meaning,
Right. But before we get into all that historian stuff, how about we talk about the immediate reaction? Did the speech land the way FDR hoped? Or did it kind of backfire?
Good question. Let's find out.
Well, it's not like everyone was on board, right? I mean, America back then.
Oh, yeah, definitely not a monolith.
Not at all. The reaction to the speech, ooh, boy. You could say it was mixed.
So who are the folks who really hated it? Who pushed back the hardest against this whole quarantine idea?
No surprise, it was the hardcore isolationists. They were like totally against any kind of international meddling.
I can see that.
Oh, yeah. For them, it was like, betraying America,
Yeah.
going against everything the country was supposed to stand for, a slippery slope to another war.
And you can't blame them for that, right? I mean,
Right.
World War I was still pretty fresh in everyone's minds.
Totally. All those losses, the trauma. It makes sense that folks would want to just avoid anything like that ever again. And those isolationists, they really played that up, They said, look, America needs to focus on America, fix our own problems first, stay out of those European messes.
Mind your own business, Europe.
Exactly. And they had these laws, too, the Neutrality Acts, passed in the 1930s specifically to keep America out of any wars.
So it's like official policy to just stay out of it.
Pretty much like a big do not disturb sign on America's door. They couldn't sell weapons to countries at war. Americans couldn't travel on ships from those countries. It was serious.
Wow. So FDR is trying to give this speech, warning about all this danger, but he's got this huge chunk of the country and Congress who are legally bound to just ignore it.
It was tough. Talk about a tightrope walk, right? He sees the danger, but he can't just, stand up and yell, we got to go to war. That would have been political suicide.
Oh, yeah, totally.
So he has to be sneaky.
Subtle.
Right. He keeps making the case for, working together, saying, look, the world's all connected now. What happens over there affects us over here.
Like trying to connect the dots for people.
Exactly. If those guys over there destroy democracy, guess what? It's bad for America, too.
Bad for business.
Yeah.
I bet that got their attention.
For sure. But he wasn't just talking, right?
Oh, he took action, too.
Yep. He started quietly increasing military spending, building up the forces just in case, and he was working on those relationships with other democracies, like Great Britain, France.
So he was kind of getting ready, but not making a big show of it.
Exactly. Laying the groundwork, building those alliances, knowing that they might need to, team up against those fascist guys sooner or later.
Playing the long game.
Exactly. And as we all know, that moment, it came pretty darn quick. 1939, World War II breaks out.
And suddenly, staying out of it. Not an option anymore.
Nope. And you know what? That quarantine speech, even though a lot of people hated it at first, it actually helped prepare everyone for what was coming.
How so?
It planted that seed, that America couldn't just hide forever. That tyranny and aggression, those are problems America couldn't just ignore. It started that shift in thinking toward getting involved.
So it wasn't an instant success, but it was like the first step in a long journey.
Exactly. It laid the groundwork, both intellectually and morally, for America to eventually join the war.
So, big picture, how should we judge this speech? Was it a success?
That's tough to say. It's complicated. It's not like the world listened to FDR and quarantined those aggressors, right?
Yeah, things didn't exactly go according to plan.
Nope. But it was a really important moment for American foreign policy. It was like the turning point, the shift away from that strict isolationism toward being more engaged with the world, taking a more active role.
Even though it caused a lot of arguments at the time?
Oh, yeah, big time. But ultimately, I think it helped get America ready for the tough times ahead.
It's a reminder that sometimes, even when people disagree, a good leader can still use their words to, to plant those seeds of change the way people think.
Totally. And it's amazing how one speech, given at like a bridge opening, could have such a lasting impact.
Right. It makes you think about the power of ideas.
Absolutely. But we have to remember the historical context too, right? The anxieties of the 1930s, the scars from World War I, that fear of another huge war, all that played a role in how people reacted to what FDR was saying.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
But at the same time, there are some timeless themes in there, too. That struggle between looking inward and engaging with the world, the whole question of, what does America owe the rest of the world? How do we balance our own interests with the needs of others?
Man, those are big questions. Still relevant today.
Totally. It's like FDR speaking to us across the decades.
I love that. It makes it so much more than just a history lesson.
And that's what makes it so powerful, even today. So yeah, the quarantine speech might seem like old news, but it can teach us a lot about leadership, how public opinion works, and the challenges of foreign policy. It's still super relevant.
Totally agree. But now let's switch gears for a bit. We've talked about the speech itself, the reactions, FDR's strategy, but how about the historians, right? They don't always agree on what FDR was really trying to do with this speech.
Oh, this is where things get juicy.
Right. So let's put on our historian hats for a second.
Not literally, of course, unless you wanna.
Okay, maybe not. But what are the different schools of thought about this speech? What did FDR really want to achieve? Let's dive into those different interpretations.
That's good.
Okay, so we've talked about the speech itself, how people reacted, and all the careful moves FDR was making. Now for the fun part.
Oh yeah. This is where it gets good.
Let's put on our historian hats for a minute.
Metaphorically, of course.
Of course. Unless you have a really cool historian hat collection. In which case, I want to see pictures.
Haha, maybe another time.
Deal. Okay, so the quarantine speech. Historians have a lot of different opinions about what FDR was really trying to do with it.
It's like this historical Rorschach test, Everyone sees something a little different.
Perfect analogy. So walk me through it. What are some of the main interpretations of, FDR's motives? What was his end game?
Well, there's this group of historians, they're often called the Moralists. They see FDR as this, pure-hearted defender of democracy.
The knight in shining armor.
Exactly. They say he was driven by this strong moral compass, that he really believed that the rise of fascism was this huge threat to, all of humanity.
So for them, the quarantine speech was like a desperate plea to the world.
Exactly. They point to that powerful language he uses, international lawlessness, the destruction of the flower of culture. For them, that's proof that FDR was deeply worried about the fate of, everyone.
That's a pretty idealistic view, though. Not all historians agree with that, right?
Right. There's another group, the Consensus School. They see FDR as, more of a pragmatist.
More a politician.
Yeah, that too. They say he was obviously idealistic, but he was also a really smart politician. He knew he couldn't ignore the realities of, politics and public opinion.
So they think this speech was about more than just, taking a moral stand.
Oh, yeah. They argue that FDR was playing a long game. He was getting the American people and maybe even Congress ready for the idea of actually going to war.
Because he couldn't just, spring that on them out of nowhere.
Exactly. He had to slowly shift public opinion.
Right.
Make them more open to the idea of getting involved.
Fascinating how one speech can have so many different interpretations. What other perspectives are out there?
Well, there's the Internationalist school. They focus on FDR's belief in, global cooperation.
Collective security.
Right. They see him as a visionary, someone who understood that in a world where everything's connected, the U.S. couldn't just isolate itself.
They think he knew that America's fate was tied to the fate of other nations.
Totally. For them, the quarantine speech was a call to action, America, we need to step up and be a leader on the world stage.
You can't just sit back and watch.
Exactly. They believe FDR was trying to create a new kind of world order. One where nations work together to stop aggression and keep the peace.
Interesting. And then there's the legalist school, right?
Oh, yeah, the legal eagles.
Yeah.
They're all about the importance of international law and treaties.
FDR talks a lot about that in the speech.
He does. The legalists see the quarantine speech as a way of, reminding everyone that rules matter.
That countries need to honor their agreements.
Exactly. They think FDR was really concerned about the breakdown of international law, the rise of, just doing whatever you want on the world stage.
So he was trying to bring everyone back to a system of, law and order.
That's it. They see him as a staunch defender of the rules. Someone who believed that peace could only last if everyone played by the same set of rules.
It's mind-blowing how one speech can generate so much debate. It really shows how complex FDR was, and all the challenges he faced as a world leader.
Absolutely. And it reminds us that history isn't always black and white. There are lots of ways to interpret events. It's our job to look at all the evidence and come to our own conclusions.
So let's wrap this up. Why should our listeners care about this speech? It happened almost 100 years ago. What makes it relevant today?
Because those questions FDR was wrestling with, they're still super relevant. Isolationism versus engagement, how to lead in uncertain times, the moral dilemmas of foreign policy. These are things we're still dealing with today.
Timeless challenges. Every country, every leader faces them in some way.
Exactly. And the quarantine speech forces us to think about our own role in the world, the choices we make, the values we stand for, what kind of world do we want to live in?
It's a reminder that words matter, that our actions have consequences, and that we can make a difference.
Absolutely. History isn't just something in a textbook. It's alive. It shapes our world. And the decisions we make today will create the future.
So as you go about your day, think about the lessons of the quarantine speech. Think about the world we're living in, the choices we have to make. What can we do to make the world a better place? How can we be forces for good?
Big questions, for sure, but they're worth thinking about.
Absolutely. Well said. And on that note, we'll leave you to ponder those questions. Thanks for joining us for another deep dive. We'll be back soon with more fascinating stories from the past. Until then, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep asking those big questions. See you next time.
Thanks for listening to Mr. Hutchings History. Keep exploring, and we'll see you next time.